Shabbat Shalom. Okay, so for everyone who was with us at the beginning, I wanted you to look at water. And I asked, first of all, anyone have a guess on my trivia question? So I think this is the parsha that mentions water more than any other parsha in the Torah. What are the two runners up that might be there that I didn't double check, but I think are 2 and 3? Anyone want to guess? Noah, yes. Noah, I think Noach is definitely one of them. And the other one is, I think, Breshit. Yeah, I heard that as well. Those would be the other two. So let's talk about the water that we see in this week's Parsha. And if you want to pull out a Chumash and follow along, you are welcome to. We're going to not do too many deep dives in verses, but if it's helpful to hold your spot, that's fine. So what's the first bit of water that we see in the Parsha as we were reading it? Where does it? Yeah. The priests wash themselves, Virginia. Thank you very much. They wash themselves specifically when? After, right, great. So they get ready to do the sacrifices. And then afterwards, there is this washing ritual. And then we'll lump in with the priestly washing. There's one other priestly moment at the beginning of the parsha with water. Anyone? I'm keeping track of bonus points in my head, and everyone will be allowed to get brownies at Kiddush in order of the number of points that you have. So just letting you know. Okay. So what is the other piece of water that goes with the priest at the beginning? Yeah. Great. The para aduma, right? This I'll editorialize and say weird, but this weird moment that we have when someone has come in contact with a dead body, the only way that they can become ritually pure again is if they get sprinkled with this weird mixture of the ashes of the para aduma, the red heifer, and a few other things that get mixed into water. And then the water is the mei nidach, the water of lustration, which can then purify them, right? So what's going on with the water that we see with the priests? This was your homework. If you didn't have, it's okay. I have a few thoughts on this. Don't worry. By the way, fun fact, this is something that is relatively unique to the Jews. Right? In the ancient world, there is, according to the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible, there are no other parallels of this sort of idea of impurity that water can cleanse, right? That is not something that appears in the other cultures around us. It's something that the ancient Israelites had. So what's going on with the water? What's its function in this ritual? Anyone have a thought as we went through? Yeah, please, Esther. Great. Great. Water as some, I'll repeat, don't worry. I'll repeat. Water is something that either can bring life or can bring death, right? That we see water has both. At the beginning, it's purifying. We're going to get to the Moses and the ways in which water can hurt us later. By the way, the Talmud also brings this out, right? Water is both blessing and curse, right? Water is something we all need. Too much water, not so great, right? So that's something that we can talk about as we move forward with this. So what else is water doing in this moment? What's its function, or what's going on with the impurity of coming in contact with a dead body, that water can then purify us? Any other thoughts? Yeah, before we, please. Nice. Great. Water as a universal solvent. I don't know what that means, but that everything kind of dissolves into water, or water has this ability to purify or to absorb whatever it is, right? Which I think is a real function of water in the ancient world, especially, right? Water represents in many ways others before I jump in with my little water represents the unknown, I wanted to say. Anyone else wanted to throw something out there before? I think in many ways, right, water is something that it is uncontrollable in the ancient world, right? They didn't have what we have today. And in Israel, right, water is completely uncontrolled because they don't have rivers, except for, the one, but it ends in a big salt lake that no one can drink out of, right? So they didn't have this sort of control of water that we, spoiled as we are in the Northeast and in 2024, feel. Water just came or it didn't. You either had it or you didn't, and you needed it to live. But it's also something that represents the unknowable, right? Water is back to Bereshit, right? Water is the primordial substance that God has to tame in order for creation to happen. So it has some measure of the uncontrollable, the unknowable. And so we use it a little bit as this thing that also purifies in a world where we are touching a dead body, which is human beings' sort of most physical contact with the other world that we can ever have. And that can be scary to us. And so the only way that we can feel better about it afterwards is with this magic of the water, right? That will then purify us and make us feel like, okay, we're back in the natural world. Okay, we're going to keep going a little bit. When's the next water show up in the Parsha? Give you a hint. It rhymes with Shmoses and the Shmrock. Yeah. Yeah. The thirst, you got me. Yes, right? So the next thing we see with water, says Cantor Gilbert, is the absence of water, right? When Miriam dies, and no, it's not you, it's the Torah. Fine, okay. When Miriam dies, the next verse is that the people were without water, they're thirsty, and they do what the Israelites do many times through the Torah, right? What do? They complain. Exactly. That one we're all right on. Okay, brownies for everyone. Right? The people complain, right? They say, why did you take us out of Egypt? In Egypt, we had meat, we had water, we had all these things, and now we don't have any water. And so they do this dance that we do again and again, right? Moses says, oh, hey, Vazmir, these people, and God says, go to the rock. This time he says, talk to the rock. Last time he says, hit the rock, right? Moses does the wrong thing. We talked about that last year. I know because I checked. So you'll wait another year before we get to talk about Moses and the rock. But what is then going on? What's the sign of water with Moses and the rock? And we'll get to the Miriam piece in a second. So what's water represent in this story of Moses? He hits the rock. We get water eventually, thank heaven, right? But at the detriment to Moses. What's water represent in this scene? Light what? Okay, great. I'm going to repeat both those things because as the rabbis say, you're both right. Okay, one of them is that water represents life, right? This fundamental thing that we all need, and this fundamental fear that if we don't have it, we won't be able to survive, we won't be able to live, right? And so the people are complaining. It also, in this story, we see a bit of a push and pull that's going to become, I would argue, essential to the human experience, which is, where does water come from? And how do we humans get water? Because the way it's set up in the Torah is that it is a reward from whom? God, exactly, right? You do good things, you get water. You do bad things, you get no water, right? Water is directly linked to God's love of us. And that's the sole way that we can try to get water, is just by making God love us, by doing right in the world, and you will get water. But Moses, right? And this does go into what was the sin of Moshe, right? But Moses does something to try to force the water out, right? Human agency. I'm hitting the rock. I'm making the water come out. I'm trying to take some control of this fundamental source of life. And that might be, at least according to some of our commentaries, the thing that Moses does that gets him, you can't go into the land, you can't lead the people anymore, because he's trying to maybe usurp some of what God's control of life is for human beings. Fast forward then a little bit later in the Parsha, and that is writ large, because what's the big fight over between Sihon and Og Bashan and the kingdoms that we're going to go through when we're trying to get into the land? I mean, I kind of primed you for this. What's the big fight over? Water. Yeah, exactly. Right. And the wells that were dug by the ancestors and that they've taken control of, but we want control of them now. Right. And so to try to get through some of the places, we have to promise where you see Moses says we're going to go through and we promise we won't drink a drop of water. We just want to get to the next people. Right. That is the big thing that he's saying. And the fight that comes out is about the water and the wells, because we see, again, sort of humans asking for agency over this water. And I would argue that water is still in the same place in our world today, though the balance is slightly shifted. Because we are no genetically different than the ancient Israelites. I don't know if that's true, scientists. But what I meant is everybody's drinking water, okay? Everyone is drinking water to live. It's still something that is essential to life. We have to have it. We live in a world where we feel like we can control it, right? I flip a switch or a tap, water shows up. I put my cup in the little thing in the fridge. I get cool, wonderful drinking water whenever I want it, right? We can shower, we can bathe, we can go to a pool, you can do whatever you want. Water is just there for us. It is no longer really a sign of the unknown. It is no longer really a sign of a thing that humans have no control over, right? Even, by the way, even when you go to the ocean, which is sort of the last remnant of an uncontrollable water source, right? You know, we've got the safe areas, you've got the lifeguards with the yellow and the green and the red flags and the right. We try to exert as much agency as we can over the water, even when we feel like we can. And so the balance shifts of where we think that our life and our water comes from. And I would argue, as I'm sure I have a million times, that there is a little bit of danger in that, in us not understanding, right? This is the Aldo Leopold quote, that the greatest danger a human can have is thinking that bread comes from the grocery store, right? That thinking that water comes from the tap and that it's just there and will always be, right? We need to, in some ways, come back to an appreciation of what water is and the natural world is in our life. And there are ways in which nature and water are sort of reasserting their control and dominance over us, right? And being unknown and not knowing, you know, if you just have a weather app on your phone, right? We get a heat warning to an air warning to a flood warning to a heat warning to a flood and a heat warning, right? That nature is trying to reassert some of its dominance over us. And I want to leave us with two thoughts, one from the Parsha and one from Rabbi Art Green. So the Parsha that I skipped over is the well of Miriam, because what the rabbis intuit, the verse of the Torah says Miriam passes away, and then the very next verse is that the Israelites were without water. And so the Midrash takes the juxtaposition of those two verses to say that there was a well of water that followed the Israelites around in the desert on the merits of Miriam, right? Because Miriam was so wonderful and she did so much for the people. There was a well of water and it gave people water whenever they were in the desert. And then when Miriam passed away, the well dried up and there was no more water. And that's why they were thirsty. And in this scene, I think there's a sign that we do have some ability to bring water into our community and our world, to bring life to those around us through the merits of our actions. And Miriam's is an example that we should try to follow and think of how we can behave in such a way so that the world will be a little bit greener, better, and there'll be water and life for those around us. And we can also look to the ways when someone passes of what wells have now run dry that we need to retap and we need to bring into the world. And then Art Green, which we'll end with, writes in his essay on Kabbalistic ecology, he writes that one of the things that we must reclaim, that the ancient religion was full of, was an appreciation of our connection to the natural world. And for the ancient rabbis, that language was language of the divine punishment and consequence of whatever you do, the land will spit you out, the rain will come, right? But what it ultimately understood was that we can't live without the world around us and that we are intrinsically linked to it. And that we need to find ways today to make our spiritual selves aware of the water of life everywhere around us. And that the water and the natural world is something that we can't live without. And that it is not just a part of our technical world, right? The pipes are broken, the pipes are this, and the sanitation department's doing whatever they're doing, but it has to be a part of our spiritual world as well. To think about nature around us, to enjoy it, to be afraid of it, to revere it, to know that we have a part in shaping it and taking care of it. Shabbat Shalom.